This is some early findings from some work that we did at the National University of Singapore, again a collaboration between the Department of Communications and New Media and the Department of Computer Science, or the School of Computing. And the presentation I gave earlier was actually partly inspired by this work. What I'm going to show is going to be purely descriptive. The most effort was done in making sure as much as possible that the data we get is reliable, that we use it properly, and that we can try to show at least and try to start characterizing some dynamics of protest movements and how they use online platforms. The theoretical framework that we keep in mind while doing that is that of networked publics. I'm sorry, I made a mistake because of the using somebody else's laptop. I just want to preface this by saying that obviously we saw in 2001 a range of social unrest across many different countries, some revolutions, and something that hasn't been mentioned so far so much actually during this event is the protests that took place in Europe before the Occupy movement started spreading in the US, which is something that interestingly some Americans are not aware of. They think that Occupy kind of started and then Europe imitated that. Specifically, I'm going to look at protests that took place in Greece in 2011. Mass media has often been credited, the internet with being instrumental in the organization, mobilization, and in some cases the success of such movements. We know whenever I would hear that, like perhaps many of you as well, I would think that we should actually put some claims of Facebook revolutions or Twitter revolutions to the test and see whether we can understand more about how they happen, what happens there, how users coordinate, and to what extent mass media influences that process. Now, I'm not yet ready to answer that. Actually, like the presenters from USC in the previous session, I see some correlations, but I'm not sure yet what exactly is the role that mass media plays there. The theoretical framework that we have to keep in mind is that of networked publics. Dana Boyd has written a nice short piece in a book edited by Zizi Papakarisi about conceptualizing social network sites like Facebook as networked publics, meaning a sort of public sphere, if you like, which is a term that most of us are familiar with, that is segmented because of technology. People, as we know, online can go and talk in different online spaces, not necessarily having to talk to others that are different to them or that disagree with them. But on the other hand, all these different publics could be networked together such that there is communication across and such that they can form a new, different, networked public sphere, which, of course, also Benkler, among others, has written about. So our question was, well, where are these networked publics online? And how is it different if you're using Twitter or Facebook or any other platform? How does that perhaps also influence the configuration of these networked publics? Where they are, where you choose to have a discussion, why some people choose to have a discussion here and not there, and also check, of course, whether they are discussing across different such spaces. So the Greek indignados, actually indignados is a Spanish word, it was a movement, an anti-austerity movement that was pretty strong during a short period in 2011 in Greece. That was a broad citizen movement, not necessarily partisan, but that was inspired by the earlier Spanish protests and occupations of public squares, and that was aimed at directing, that was aimed at promoting direct democratic processes vis-a-vis what was generally viewed as a corrupt establishment that, as we know later, led Greece close to bankruptcy and so on and so forth, and was also characterized by a broad rejection of established political formations, which was still expressed now recently in the Greek elections, where parties that used to dominate Greek politics received very low percentages in the elections. And we almost had a smaller, more radical left-wing party becoming the first party in the elections. So this movement was very active in 2011. We collected data from May 1st, 2011 to January 15th, 2012, because we wanted to see basically how that activity grew, started, how it waned with time. We did Facebook search, collecting data based on different keywords that we knew were relevant to the movement, based actually on some work that we had done earlier a bit on Twitter, where we just tried to see what kind of hashtags, what kind of information people use, what kind of names they use to talk about the topics they are interested in. So we kind of used observations from Twitter and some expert input actually to choose what kind of keywords to also use when we try to find relevant pages on Facebook. And then we try to collect all public posts on public Facebook pages, groups, and events. As you may know, there's like these basic 3 types of Facebook pages. And what we come up with is a set of pages. It's about 1,541 pages. This is how many pages were created in connection to this movement. Each one of them perhaps hoping to become a small or a large hub of activity where people would discuss this. It's interesting actually to look at some of the details, which I will not have time to discuss now, about how different pages would frame the issues in different ways. And the number of users was almost 42,000 who participated over this period of these few months in 2011. And the total posts, that's what I call their activity graph, that's actually the total posts posted on these pages, were almost 1 million. So in comparison, actually Occupy Wall Street is very small if you consider the small size of Greece. First of all, the dynamics of user activity. That thing can be interesting just to look at the general dynamics of this. If you look at new pages created, I'm sorry if you cannot see very easily the labels on the axis. We have time going from May 1st to middle of January on the horizontal axis. And on the vertical axis, you can see it's new pages created, posts on pages, new users, so the time when a user makes a first post to any of the pages, and number of active users over time. And quickly you notice that actually the vast majority of pages were created within a period of just a few days. These 1,500 pages we talked about. There were still pages being created constantly until the end actually of the observation period, but the vast majority was created very early. And now, of course, there's the question, okay, so why did some of these pages become more hubs of activity and others didn't? What we noticed with respect to user activity, the posts on the top right-hand corner, is that there was, of course, a lot of user activity very early on, but it spiked more later. So there's a period of greater mobilization, of a greater intensity of participation that follows the first period where you have the initial setup where people start creating pages and they start posting something. And the number of new users also exhibits some spikes, but basically it wanes after a while quite quickly. So basically it's pretty much the same people that participate, and the question is how engaged are they? How long will they continue participating? And we see, of course, that for a long period there was very little activity. But if we look at the daily number of active users and the posts, you see that after a period of very little activity around summer, which also coincides, of course, with the vacation period and extreme heat, and people tend to then congregate less in public spaces. You see that in fall, there was an attempt to resume activity. Actually, people tried to also go more to the squares and create new occupations. and new protests, but it didn't have any more the dynamic that it had in the beginning, so we see much less activity. So we basically identify these 4 phases, try to think about whether these might also exist in other such situations, or whether this is just peculiar to this particular movement, where initially we have a configuration phase where people build stubs of publics, if you like to think about it that way, pages, which hope to become populated then with meaningful messages. And where people start posting something initially, just to say, hi, I'm here, also starting some discussions. But then a period of increasing, if you like, mobilization, where people start posting a lot more, they get excited, or they start having maybe more intense discussions. We haven't done the analysis to see exactly what they have been discussing at different points of time, at different points in time yet. But there comes a period of respite, there comes maybe disappointment, there comes tiredness after a while, and some people leave, some people persist, and those people actually that come back to post again do tend to come back to post to the same pages again. So there's some habit forming there. Now, the only other thing I'm going to show is how we try to look at the dynamics of this as a system overall. So this is, let me preface this, okay, by saying that this is a bipartite graph, okay? It's users posting to pages. And we're interested on the users that pages receive and the posts that pages receive. That means actually that if you want to look at structure by starting and looking at the degree distributions, you actually have 4 degree distributions. And I will show them here. And here we show that this is, for example, the users contributing to each page. So you have number of pages on the left-hand side, and on the vertical axis. On the horizontal axis, you have number of users contributing to each page. And there is different plots for different points in time as the network grows. More useful is actually the plot on the right-hand side. The one on the left-hand side just shows that it looks like a power law, it is a power law, and the plot on the right-hand side shows on a daily basis how the exponent of that power law has changed day to day. And we thought that it was quite interesting and useful to see. So from that, the value is around 0.7 to 0.6 there. We see that in spite of a very large number of pages created very early on, users were able to very quickly converge around a small number of pages. And the relative share of attention accorded to the more popular pages changed little over time. There was a little bit of a balancing, but then it stayed constant throughout that whole period. That's interesting as a first observation. Now, if we look similarly at the distribution of posts contributed to each page, so on the vertical axis, we have again number of pages. Horizontal axis is number of posts contributed to each page. The evolution of the exponent of the power law looks much different. The difference in the values is not so great. It goes from 0.6 to 0.4. So what we can say from that is that initially a small number of pages receive a larger number of posts, but over time, the difference between the number of posts that the most popular pages receive and the posts that other pages receive is somewhat reduced. Okay, so people start also exploring other pages and start posting also there. Okay, 2 more. If you look at pages contributed to by each user, so now we're looking at it per user, how many pages do I generally post to on average? You know, as a user, have I posted just only to 1 page or to 2 or to several? If we look again at the evolution of the exponent of the power law, we find that it starts from a value of about 2.2 and goes down to 1.9, not a big difference. If we want to say anything about that, is that initially each user contributes to a small number of pages. User contributions tend to spread to a larger number when overall activity drops down during the summer. But actually, when users come back, they actually seem to be coming back and contributing to a smaller number of pages again. So when activity starts growing again, it starts again concentrating itself in a small number of pages. And from what we see, we haven't tested that rigorously, it seems to be the same pages. So people form habits and go back again to the same pages to post. Finally, an interesting plot where we have a bigger difference actually also here in the values of gamma is this one where you see that the posts contributed by each user. So basically, activity across users. Some users are very active, some are not so active. You've seen plots like that before, I'm sure. But here we are looking at its evolution also in time, over several months on a daily basis. And we see that the gamma starts from a value around 1.9, and it drops almost all the way to 1. And so this means that activity basically spreads very quickly, actually, from being very concentrated in a few pages to spreading to other pages. And this in turn can also be interpreted as the most active users burning out faster and reducing their level of activity faster than other users do. Which again thinks could be an interesting system dynamic that might be replicable also in other settings. So I just observed that there is a selection effect. The users seem to be pretty good in selecting quickly and posting exclusively on a small number of pages. There's some dispersion effect that over time, this focus on a small number of pages does wane a bit. What you might call a burnout effect, I'm not sure if that's the best way of saying, where actually those that are the most active, the most driven users burn out faster than others. And a habitual effect where actually when people return, they tend to return to the same online pages that they were familiar with to begin with. What does all this mean? Well, we think that it's interesting to look at Facebook, and we will compare it to Twitter because we have also the same data for Twitter. Because Facebook, unlike Twitter, is relevant. I'm almost done. Is relevant, but has this characteristic actually that most activity is mediated actually through people's personal networks, and therefore could be much more segmented. It could be harder to create large-scale discussions where everybody sees everybody else's post. How do people go around that? Well, they create public pages where they can participate. But even there's no way to say, show me all posts that relate to this movement. You cannot enter one search term and immediately see what everybody is posting. Even then, the best you will get is a list of pages, events, groups, other things. And then you have to click on each one of them individually to see what people are posting. So again, discussion on Facebook tends to be much more segmented than on Twitter. So we think that the fact that users seem to be able to very quickly converge in a small number of publics is encouraging, because it shows that they can actually quickly decide where they want to have conversations and that they don't spread too much across these 1,500 pages. And also that the very early stages are critical in the configuration, because this is interesting from a policy perspective also, because sometimes I've had discussions with people in administration in Singapore and elsewhere where they say, what if there are discussions happening on social media which go in a direction which we feel is problematic? Could we intervene? Could we move these discussions elsewhere? Could we create our own forums where maybe then the government can also have more of a say? And the answer is that well, if you're not there when it's starting, you've pretty much lost it. And it will be probably hard to convince users to move over to another forum to have the discussions there. That's all.
Thank you very much, Giorgos.